Hey guys, one of our PayPal supporters sent a link to a story reported by the mainstream media about a young lady who at 25 years old was working for a cosmetics company in Japan, and she was what the Japanese called pawahara. Pawahara is something that they've talked about a little bit over the last few years. Power harassment, right? Which I'd prefer to call bullying or abuse, because that's really what they're referring to, but they call it pawahara. And we have actually talked about it in previous videos. We've seen some talk of it, and we showed you a poster that we saw in a restaurant recently at the entrance encouraging customers not to harass or abuse the staff. So there is slowly more talk of it, but the reality is that it's still just seems to be as prevalent as it ever was. So this particular story, this poor young lady, 25 years old, worked for a cosmetics company, and she was subjected to bullying and abuse by her boss, including one session where he apparently abused her for 50 minutes and called her a stray dog and a bunch of other abuse as well. And the result of that was she ended up not being able to work because she was so ill because of the abuse, and then suicided, killed herself. And a government agency, I can't remember the name of the agency, but there's a government agency like a occupational health and safety type part of government agency, investigated, and they said that there was a direct connection between the abuse that she received from her boss at this company and her suicide, the direct connection. So then her family is suing that company because of the abuse that led to her suicide. That whole story is terrible, isn't it? But it gets worse. It gets worse, and this is the bit that really pissed me off, was that the company, the family of that poor lady are suing the company because of what that boss did to her, and the company's response to the fact that they were being sued for that was to say that her attitude towards her work was bad, that she had a bad attitude towards their work. That's what that company learnt. I mean, this, keep in mind too, this took a long time. Apparently she tried to commit suicide, and whatever she did, it took like almost 12 months for her to die. So I'm actually am familiar with that sort of thing. I had a friend that hung himself, and it took him 3 days to die because he had brain damage, and it took another 3 days to die. And it seems like something similar to her. So there was a year of that. Then there was the investigation, and then there was this case being brought by her family. So this company's had a long time to have a look at, consider the situation, and what that company came out of it with was that her attitude towards her work was bad. That was their response. So obviously no self-reflection at all, no growth at all within that company as to their awareness of, bullying and harassment and that sort of stuff. So that, I mean, obviously, that's. But the saddest thing is that this is really common. These stories are really common. We get them all the time. See, the problem is they can't report the connection between a company's behaviour and their employee's death unless they can sort of justify, some sort of evidence that there's a connection. And in this case, because that government agency came to the conclusion there was a direct connection, because of that, the media can report it, and the company can sue, so the family can sue the company, and we can say this is what happened. However, in the majority of cases, there's no clear evidence of a connection between whatever abuse a person's received at their work and their death. And sadly, it's incredibly common. Now and again, we will see a story where they will make a direct connection, but more often than not, they don't. Japan's really proud at the moment that their suicide rate has gone down from about 30,000 a year down to 25,000 a year. So that's been reported quite a bit recently, that that this last 12 months They've had the lowest number of suicides for a long time, and we're down to 25,000 suicides a year. And this power hutta, it just sounds too nice calling it that. Their cute little, abbreviated name like that they always come up with, like Family Mart or Family Mart and all that sort of stuff. So they give it a cute little name, Cool Biz, for wearing cooler clothes during summer. Power hutta has that same sort of cutesy feel, and it just doesn't do it justice, does it? It's bullying and abuse, and it's not just in the workplace, it's across the board. Sadly, high school students is a huge percentage of incidents of suicides amongst high school students every year, and now and again that'll be reported as that this person was abused and bullied at school to the point that they killed themselves. Really common here. There's other reasons as well. They also have pressure from work, from results, tests and stuff at school, and those sort of pressures as well. Not be able to conform. But it's Japanese society. We have talked about this bullying thing in the past. Japanese society is based on bullying. The kohai senpai thing, the lower friend, higher friend thing. In Japanese society, no two people are equal. Everybody has a higher position or lower position to everybody else. And, if you're senpai, if the person above you is an a-hole, your life can be hell. I know from our kids, if they have a nice senpai above them at school, it's lovely. My senpai's really kind and really lovely, and, one of my kids actually hangs out with her senpai. They're actually buddies with her older friend from school, But if your senpai is an a-hole, whether it be at school or at work or in your club or in your group or, wherever it happens to be, your life can be hell. Because in Japanese society, the way they see it is that if you don't conform and do what you're supposed to do, and if you're not exactly the same as everybody else, and you get bullied by the group, they sort of see it as, generally, not everybody, but generally the way Japanese society sees it is, that's what keeps you in line, right? So the kid at school that does something different from everybody else and isn't doing exactly the same thing as everyone else, he gets bullied by the other kids, and that sort of pushes him into line, so he starts behaving the same as everybody else. And that's the way Japanese society works, and the same in the workplace. I've seen it. I was out walking one day, and there was a car dealer near our house early in the morning, and this boss had lined up all the staff in a row, and it looked like it was salespeople and mechanics and all sorts of people all lined up in a row, standing there all very formally with their hands behind their backs. And this guy was just ripping them, just absolutely ripping them to shreds, just abusing them, like some sort of scene from an old military movie, some old drill sergeant just standing there abusing them. I know one of our friends used to work in a supermarket, and she said that their boss used to do it every morning. He'd get them all out, and they have this practice in the morning where they practice saying, "Ishimasu," they've got to say the greeting exactly the same, "Welcome to the supermarket," and they've all got to say it exactly the same way. And she said regularly he'd abuse them. He'd line them all up and he'd abuse them. And it's still part of Japanese society. The boss abusing the staff, the teacher abusing the students, the mothers abusing the kids. That's a really common thing here too. Mothers screaming and abusing their kids. They think it's normal. They think it's normal here. Most of the mothers that I've encountered and most of the families that we know, when the kids don't do something that they're supposed to do, or, there's a problem, abusive mothers standing and screaming, and it's just this thing, bullying. I remember the first time when my wife was hooking into one of our kids about something, and I said to her later, I said, "That's really bullying when you do that." And she just didn't want to accept it. She didn't want to accept it because in Japanese culture, mothers abusing their kids, yelling and ranting and raving and screaming at their kids until their kids are crying, and then keep doing it. In Japanese society, that's just a normal thing that mothers do. That's what she said, actually. That was her response. Futsu, it's what mothers do. And I said to her, yeah, but it doesn't achieve anything. It's not good communication. It's not good. but she didn't want to accept it because in her mind it was normal. And this is the thing in Japanese society, is people, you know, and the Japanese power hara, they call it, people in a position of power, which, I mean, that's what we call bullying, isn't it? If someone has some sort of position of power over someone else, or they're bigger than someone else, or whatever reason, they're abusing someone below them, that's bullying, isn't it? That's the definition of bullying, you know, and in their society that's just normal. That's what keeps society in line. That's what keeps everybody conforming and doing what they're supposed to do. So, and of course, what the result of that, of course, is that sometimes it's too much for some people, and they get it, and they get more of it, and get more of it, and get more of it. There's a huge percentage of kids now that either don't want to go to school or rarely go to school, and this is one of the reasons. And, you know, any kid here that's a bit different from the other kids is likely to be subjected to abuse, and as a result of that, there's a high percentage of kids here who don't want to go to school, a percentage of kids here that rarely go to school, and a percentage of kids here that kill themselves. So, you know, it's typical. You know, we talk about it all the time about how slowly Japan changes, you know, and you get these things where they sort of realize, you know, that the things like this, you know, sexual harassment is the other one, that they slowly start to realize that, oh, the rest of the world considers that sexual harassment's not good. You know, the rest of the world seems to think that bullying's no good. So they sort of realize, on one level, they realize, yeah, we should stop doing that. And you'll see them talking about it, and you hear them talking about it. But the reality is, you know, you hear them talking about how sexual harassment's bad and, you know, bullying's bad. You hear them talking about it on television. Now, you know, rarely, but you do, it happens. And things like the poster at the restaurant, you know, you do. But more than that, you see people being bullied and abused, you know, and sexually harassed. You see that more. So, you know, the reality is, you know, they're all for the image of, yeah, we're very modern and we understand that power harassment's bad. That's all cool. But the reality is, it doesn't really change. I've been at the school and seen kids bullying other kids, and the teacher just act like they don't see it because they think it's normal. They think that bullying will keep those kids in line and keep them behaving like everybody else. You know, you see it in the playground, you see it in the park. You go to the park, there's lots of kids, you know, and you get groups of kids there. There's younger ones and older ones, and you know, some fat bully dude bullying some little kid, you know. So yeah, it's one of those things. This is going to be an unpopular video. As I'm saying this, I'm realizing, you know, videos like this are really unpopular because people don't like hearing anything like this negative about Japan. But you know, there's some really good things about the fact that Japanese culture has sort of not changed much, you know, in the last 100 years. You know, there's a lot of good things about that a lot of positive things that we talk about all the time, about all the good things about Japan, you know. But the social stuff like this, there's some stuff like this that's just really bad, and that it hasn't really changed, and it really won't change for a really long time, because stuff like this, it'll take a long time for this to change, you know. So you just got to accept it. If you live here, you've got to accept it, and then try and have influence in your immediate circle, you know. So it's hard though when you live in a society when everybody thinks this sort of behaviour is normal. Well, not everybody, you know, but when the majority of people think this sort of behaviour is normal, and that it's sort of, in fact, a lot of people actually think it's important, it's essential, because this sort of thing is what keeps society in line, keeps people conforming and doing what they're supposed to do. You know, you'll actually have, to a lesser extent sometimes, but you'll actually have, if you've got someone who thinks they're your senpai, because maybe it's a neighbour who's a bit older, or, you know, if you've got somebody in your life in Japan who thinks they're in a position above you for some reason, they'll do stuff to varying levels. I can't say I've actually been bullied, but I've had older dudes trying to tell me what I should do and what I shouldn't do. It's quite common. It is quite common. Tell you, dumb it, don't do that, You know, and in another country, probably they'd just be told to F off, right? But in Japan, it's normal for people that think, you know, they've got a higher position than you for some reason to tell you what you should and shouldn't do, you know? It's just Japanese society. So to our friend that sent that article, yeah, I said to him, after I read the article, I wrote back to him and said, yeah, that pisses me off, that the response from the company, you know, that all they got out of it, all the company got out of that whole situation was that poor lady had a bad attitude towards her work, you know. And I wrote back and I said, that really pissed me off. That company's reaction to the whole thing just pisses me off. And he said, and I said, it pisses me off, I'm going to make a video, right? Because when something motivates me that much, I've got to say something. And he said the whole thing pisses him off. And actually, I'm sure he won't mind me saying this, he actually lives in Japan and works for a Japanese company, and he said that his boss actually spent 2 hours once giving them all a lecture, giving all the staff a lecture on working better and work-life balance, and as a result they're all at work till 7 o'clock at night. Right? The boss talked for 2 hours about working better and work-life balance and kept them all there till 7 o'clock at night as a result of his talk, right? So they've just got no idea. Generally, I mean, there's some that probably do, but you know, I haven't met them. It's just like, you know, you try and explain to people here about why bullying's bad. They don't actually have a word for bullying. They say ijiwarui, which is like annoying. You know, they need a word for bullying because pawahara just doesn't cut it. It just doesn't cut it. It doesn't have the connotations or carry the weight, you know. But they've got no idea. And, you know, when you do try and tell them, like when I told my wife, to my wife's credit, she does absorb things like that. She's good, but she's rare, you know, because usually if you try and tell somebody that bullying's bad, you know, that having the senpai bullying the kohai is bad, you know, they don't get it. They might say they do. There's another thing about, we talked about this before too, you know, the difference between what Japanese society says and what Japanese people say and what they actually really think and what they actually really do, way different. You know, they know how to say what the right thing to say is, you know, and the government knows how to say what they think the right thing to say is, but what they actually do is just something totally different. You know, it's like talking about any sort of problems that foreigners have in Japan. You know, rarely. There was a conference once years ago in Tokyo talking about the topic of the conference was something like how to help foreigners assimilate in Japan, right? That was the topic of the conference, is how to help foreigners assimilate in Japan. And they had all these guest speakers, and there was a big conference in Tokyo, right? No foreigners were invited. I mean, there's some foreigners in Japan. I know some. There's one guy I know that's really well assimilated. He works for in the media. He's on television a lot, and he's on radio a lot. He's an Australian guy. I know he's a really good guy. I know him. He's actually a pilot too, same as me. And really, really good guy. Really, really good guy. And you know, his Japanese is fluent, and he's, you know, he's really well assimilated. And a guy like him would have been excellent at that conference because he'd be able to tell them all sorts of stuff and give them the others, you know, the insider's point of view, you know. And there's lots of guys like him that are really well assimilated that would be really good at that conference. You know, if he's on television, radio and things, so he could get up and make a powerful speech for sure and tell them all sorts of stuff that would be good for them to know. But unfortunately, at the conference in Tokyo about how foreigners can assimilate, foreigners weren't invited. So that's just, I'm telling you that one is a classic example of what they say being different from the reality, you know. You know, if they really cared about helping foreigners assimilate, you'd think they'd have at least invited one, you know, but no, it was all Japanese people talking about how to help foreigners assimilate, you know, which makes you wonder if any of them had any idea what it's like being a foreigner in Japan. I would suggest they don't. But anyway, so that's just it. Look, you know, it's a wonderful, wonderful place to live. Love this place, absolutely love this place. But there's some realities like this that are really hard to take sometimes. The ruthlessness, you know, the ruthlessness. I'll tell you something very, I'll make an observation that's going to be very controversial and piss some people off. now and again I'll hear someone say, I'm amazed that Japanese people are such nice people. It makes you wonder how World War II could have happened, you know, how they could have done those things in World War II. The longer you live here, the more you can understand how what Japan did in World War II is totally understandable. How they got into the war, you know, the leaders have said this is what we're going to do, and everyone's gone, hi, and they've gone and done it. No one thought for themselves. No one said, hey, wait a minute, that's not a good idea. Everyone just did it. And then the ruthlessness, some of the behavior of some of the Japanese soldiers and some of the things that they did during the war, when you see the way Japanese society functions, no surprises at all. You know, they saw the enemy as the enemy, and that the enemy didn't live by Japanese code, so they were just considered to be barbarians, and they should be treated like animals as a result. So when you live in Japan and you see the way society works, all the shit that happened in World War II, there's no surprises there at all. So that's probably, finishing on that note, we've probably made this video the most unpopular video ever made. But our channel is anything and everything about Japan, and if we don't address all these topics, then we're full of shit, aren't we? Because you've got to tell the whole story. If you don't tell us the whole story, if you want to have a popular YouTube channel, you only talk about the good stuff. We know that's a fact. But you know, if you want to have some integrity and tell the whole story, then you've got to tell the whole story, haven't you? Good and bad. So anyway, there was a whole bunch of bad for you guys. Sorry about that, but that's the reality. More positive videos coming soon.